Hello, everyone, and welcome to 360ed.tv. My name is Chooks, and I'll be your show host for today. With me in the house, we have the pleasure of introducing Michael North, who is the Digital Learning Manager, DuluxGroup. Hello, Michael.
Hey, how you going today, Chooks?
Very good, thank you. Before we begin, just so we can get to know you, can you give us some context into your background, what you do, and particularly what excites you as a Digital Learning Manager?
Well, I work for DuluxGroup. My primary role at the moment is customer education, and I look after our digital programs. I've got a background in interactive media and probably about 10 or 12 years in learning and development. I love my job. I love what I do. I'm a creator at heart. So I love the fact that I can come to work, create, and ultimately that helps people, be better or improve.
Perfect segue into the word edutainment. Can you tell us about the concept of edutainment and why that matters for learning design, particularly learning experience?
One of the challenges of modern learning and development teams is to try and, first of all, gain a learner's attention, but also keep that attention. So I think attention spans are decreasing. We know this, but people also spend less time learning. So in my experience, people are often selective with, the items or the offerings that they tend to engage with. So edutainment mixing or borrows elements from mainstream media that allow us to inject some fun or some engagement into the experience, which ultimately is going to help with things like retention and memory, hopefully uptake and some other bits and pieces as well.
Excellent. So that actually sounds very fascinating. I often wonder, would you say that an academic or anyone who's designed an online course that embeds a story or a pivotal conversation from the media in their course, is that part of edutainment, considering that that's engagement, or would you say they've got to do some level of fun?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. The key element in edutainment is probably moving more from something that is impact driven, catering more to people's emotions. And a good way to do that is story, as you mentioned. So just thinking about the story that you're trying to tell and thinking about that connection before you engage is probably one of the most important things in getting that balance right.
Okay. Talking about balance, how do you now then strike the balance? Oftentimes we need to know that this is not a fun exercise. For a fun exercise, we want to also make sure that the student or the learner is meeting the learning experience. So how do you strike the balance between designing digital learning content and meeting learning outcomes?
Getting that balance between form and function is critical, right? So form being, the visual aesthetics, the engagement, the entertainment part of the course, and the function ultimately being the learning outcomes or the objectives or the change that you're trying to drive. For me personally, it always starts with the learning objectives or the outcomes the learners need. So what is it that you're trying to drive? Making sure that you factor that in when making any other decisions. If you don't do that, as you're kind of alluding to, you run the risk of creating something that has, no depth or, superficial learning, so to speak, smoke and mirrors, and you don't actually translate that behavior or that learning doesn't stick. So measurement is probably one of the things that's extremely important in regards to, making sure you don't push the limit too far.
So what are the KPIs you use to measure that?
Oh, you're really testing me now. So, ultimately, when it comes to measurement, you would understand as well as me that also needs to be aligned to your learning objectives, right? And depending on the modality of what you're doing, whether it's a video, whether it's an e-learning course, there's probably going to be different metrics. I'd say at a top level, the first thing that you need to consider is some form of behavior assessment or something to determine, well, has the learning actually transferred, be it immediately and then, down the line. If you're talking about digital forms like video and other elements, you'd also look at other metrics, things like maybe learner experience. You could look at click-through rate, the amount of times people are clicking on your course or the amount of times they're finishing your course. You could look at things like net promoter score, depending on the dimensions and the metrics you're trying to, look at, I guess you need to build that picture and, make sure that is aligned to ultimately your learning goals.
Talking about those metrics, net promoter scores and all the others, I think a question that just popped in my head is the different learners with different learning modalities or learning styles. What's your experience with how you, is it either mix the different learning contents to meet the different, or do you do an assessment of the percentages of each?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. In my current role, working in customer or partner education, we work with a lot of different cohorts or groups of learners, different demographics, different backgrounds, different prior experience. So there is definitely that analysis part of any approach where you say, well, what is the environment the learning is going to be completed in? What do they know? What don't they know? What do they need from us? Because there is always going to be a business requirement or, a business need for us to drive a learning solution. But sometimes it's just thinking about the learner experience. What do they actually need from it? There's also getting the balance between formal and informal. We do definitely some work in formal learning where we look at things like e-learning or courses or pathways. If I want to learn something personally, I head straight to YouTube, for example, which is more of an informal learning type. So when you're talking about measurement, the measurement might be views, retention, click-through rate. Like it might be a little bit different to say looking at course completion or score. So again, understanding, I think, your learner and starting from that place of need is probably the best advice that I would give.
Excellent. I actually thought so too. Just to wrap up today's conversation is looking at someone who's never done anything in the edutainment space. Maybe share with an example how anyone who wants to take this on as a project and maybe baby steps and how they can achieve that.
Well, I think if I was to give one piece of advice today, we all consume content in our daily lives, whether it's learning content, whether it's entertainment content. I often take the approach of trying to build something that I want to consume. There's been many a times in the past where, it's quite easy to just do a tick the box and, you don't want to see it ever again. But I try to really build stuff that, I want to consume personally. If you're looking about things you can do to start that, videos are a great start to get started. You might already have a face-to-face course, for example. One thing you might do is apply a video as a prerequisite, or you might have a podcast with an SME. Just something low fidelity that you can kind of bolt on flipped classroom to essentially introduce that concept. Things like breakout activities within courses as well. There's an old rule called the rule of tens, which kind of says that you should be resetting every 10 minutes or the attention. So even when you're putting a traditional course together, it's maybe just switching up with different multimedia elements.
These are really excellent examples of how to start as someone who's not experienced it. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to Michael North for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. Edutainment is an exciting space, and I'd love to see how we'll continue to expound and explore this space.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jux. Great to be here.
You're welcome.